This is Family Electric Ghost, and we're live on the air with Greg Stern, owner of from the Ground Up Physiotherapy. Welcome to the Family Electric Ghost podcast. How are you doing tonight?
Thank you very much for having me. Appreciate it.
I want to let people know we are a featured podcast on Newsly. You can see the icon up there. That's an audio-only platform. For those of you that use the coupon code of Ghost, you can listen to that for free for 30 days. And we will be on Newsly later tonight. So tonight, we do also have your website, which is rebuild.groundupphysio.com. The full link will be clickable when we're published, so you'll be able to check that out and dive into that. So if people click on that link, that's like your primary website?
Yeah, that's a link to an online mobility program that I have available for those that are looking to get to the root cause of their pain.
Cool. So maybe you can kind of give a background into your story and how you
Yeah.
developed your company and why you're into natural versus conventional footwear, which is the topic that we're going to get into tonight. So I actually have that up for those of you who can see it. It says natural versus conventional footwear, and then maybe give you your background as how you came to that decision to go with that
Yeah, for
philosophy.
sure. So my name is Greg, and I'm the owner of a clinic in Montreal called From the Ground Up Physiotherapy, and I help people get to the root cause of their pain by teaching their entire body to work together rather than just a isolated approach that focuses on the symptoms and really focusing on the site of pain. Rather, I look more holistically at how the whole body is working together so that we could teach everything to work well so that nothing is being overloaded. And I came to this journey myself, dealing with chronic pain for many years, actually. So I just turned 30, but 10 years ago, I had experienced an innocent ankle sprain that just never healed properly. So I was playing flag football, and I sprained my ankle. And up to that point, I had many injuries, broken bones, lacerations, and very acute traumatic injuries that would just, run their course and get better. But this was just a sprain, and I had sprained my ankle prior to that, but this one just didn't want to go away. And so I tried everything to fix the issue I was having. I was going to see different professionals. I was going to physiotherapy, or in the US, they call it physical therapy. It's the exact same thing. I was seeing osteos. I was going to different doctors and waiting lots of time and trying different exercises and modalities and lots of hands-on work and exercise to fix my pain, but nothing was really working. And so at the time, it was really troublesome for me because I was 21 and was dealing with pain for 2 years already at this point. So I was trying everything. And eventually I opted for surgery and thinking that would be the answer to all my problems. But when I woke up after surgery, I now had new pains in my body that I hadn't even had prior to the surgery. So I was dealing with hip pain and back pain that lingered for 2 years post-surgery. So it was a really, really tough time for me. And I was thinking at the time I was going to study medicine. I was like, I've always been in health sciences and in the healthcare worlds, and the body interested me. But I started veering towards like, well, I got to get out of pain. I can't think about anyone else right now. I just got to get out of pain. And I went into a master's program at McGill University in Montreal called Physical Therapy. And what I realized was I was learning the exact same thing in school that people were using as treatment to me, and it wasn't working. So I'm like, wait a minute, like I'm learning the same kind of bullshit type of, symptom-based approach. And I didn't get better from that. So like I was still in pain at the time. Like, well, this is not going to work on other people. So I really started to take a deep dive and understand like, what are other people like thinking about and learning about? Like who knows the best about feet in the world? I need to learn from them. And I started going down more rabbit holes and learning about footwear, which we'll talk about in just a second. And there was a lot of other things that were being said, which is the exact opposite of what I was being told in school. And I started, okay, well, what I was being told clearly didn't work. So let's try and learn from other people. And slowly but surely, I was experimenting with different, ways of looking at treatment. And I started to make progress slowly but surely. And, we fast forward a couple of years later, and I have no more pain. I could go on hikes barefoot after not being able to stand barefoot for more than 10 seconds. I go on 10-kilometer hikes barefoot. I could slackline, where you set up like a little 2-inch thing between like 20 feet between trees. I could like tight line a rope. I have incredible balance. I move in very unique ways, and I'm now helping people along their journeys where they've been around the houses and have been told like, look, I don't think there's anything we could really do. And I've helped people with years and years of chronic pain get back to doing the things they love, just like I've been able to do myself. So that's kind of a little bit about my story.
That's interesting. I've talked to a lot of therapists and coaches who have kind of taken more holistic approaches or gone away from Western medicine, more into Eastern philosophies or, ideas that look at like the whole body, mind, soul, spirit,
For sure.
and nutrition, which
Yes,
sometimes like in the West,
of
they it's like
course.
it's always a pill, it's a surgery or a pill or a procedure, and it's never like, well, maybe you should stop eating that junk food. Maybe you should drink more water instead of sugar and sugar water and coffee, and like
Awesome.
maybe you should, listen to your body when your body tells you something and
Yeah.
actually not ignore it.
Or, or
So
kill it with
it's interesting.
painkillers, right?
Yeah, so I had a question about like going barefoot because that seems like counterintuitive. Everybody's always like, "Well, I got to protect the soles of my feet with some kind of shoe wear or footwear," and like maybe you can talk about like the philosophy behind going barefoot and what that actually helps you do.
Of course. Well, I mean, in our modern society, it seems strange to go barefoot, but like if we just look back a little bit of time ago, we didn't have the modern footwear we did today. And, hundreds of thousands of years, we roamed the plains of the world with our bare feet or with shoes that were simply like protection against the elements, but didn't
Hmm.
impose on the foot. So if we think about most shoes that are on the market today, they're not natural. So we have conventional footwear versus natural. So I'll kind of define the difference. So when we think about an ideal shoe, we are looking for something that is widest at the tips of the toes. Okay. Now, when people think about that for a sec, so I have a model here so people can see if they're watching live. But the idea is that if we think about an Asics and New Balance, Brooks, Under Armour shoe, whatever shoe that most people wear, we can appreciate that the widest foot that we possibly have when we're born does not fit perfectly inside of a typical runner. Our toes get slightly pushed together. Now, a very
Oh,
obvious example is a high-heeled shoe. We can appreciate that a high-heeled shoe is a triangle. And so a normal, or I should say a natural foot shape does not fit inside a triangle, obviously. But to a
yeah.
lesser extent, our classic running shoes are actually compressing our toes slightly together. And what
Mm.
that does is, think about bunions and Morton's neuroma and all these problems that people are diagnosed with, and they say, "Oh, it's hereditary. My mom had it." Well, the only thing hereditary about bunions are the fact that you and your mom or your dad
Wearing
were the exact
shoes.
same shoes that push the toes together. We can make it again, bring it back to our hands. If you wear gloves, which have individual fingers, your fingers can move. But if you wear mittens, where your four fingers are always pushed
Yeah,
together,
pushed together. Yeah.
oh, then your hands would start looking like mittens and you wouldn't be able to text. You'd start picking things up in a weird way. It's the same exact principle with our feet. So that's one point. The width of the toe box in every single shoe on the market, except for the ones I'm going to discuss, are not ideally as wide as they need to be for the tips of the toes to be as spread out as possible. Now, the next element goes against what a lot of people are told: flexibility. Okay. I need arch support, stability, motion control. We hear all these words about this idea of control, and we don't want the foot to change shapes, for it to flatten out. We hear that as a bad thing, right? But let's now look at a cast. Okay, imagine I break my arm and I'm a cast for 6 weeks. Would you expect my arm to look strong and muscular, or would you expect after 6 weeks for my muscles to wither away? Right? Not
Yeah.
moving.
Atrophy. Yeah. Yeah.
And
You
also,
lose it and you have to get it back.
are we going to expect my arm to bend and flex very well, or are we going to expect it to be stiff? Naturally stiff. So our feet are meant to flatten. They're like a spring that goes down and then reabsorbs back. Our arch is meant to flatten, just like my neck is meant to move left and right. But if I put a brace on my neck, let's say I was
I
in a
can't
car
move.
accident it would make sense maybe to temporarily immobilize something, but afterwards, of course, I need to work on mobility. But we don't apply the same logic to our feet. We say, okay, foot, you're meant to stay rigid. And now the foot hits the ground like a freaking like cement block instead of being allowed to splay and interact with the ground in the way that it was
Oh,
nature intended. So a shoe like this, notice how I can completely fold it up into a ball. A shoe protects the foot but doesn't impose on it. So now we talked about width, we talked about flexibility. Another thing we could talk about is the idea of a heeled footwear. Now, why do women like to wear high heels? It pops features, right? Bigger booty,
hmm
bigger bust, and an exaggeration of the spinal curves. Okay.
hmm
Now, it's very obvious when it's a 3-inch heel. But if you take your runners right now and you look at them and go, hey, wait a minute, is my heel and my toes at the same height? For the majority of shoes in the market, think about a dress shoe or even an Asics or a classic running shoe, there's actually a lift at the heel. So what that does to my body is it pushes my center of mass forward. I have to exaggerate at my spine now to prevent myself from falling over. I have to bend my knees. And so from the get-go, I'm now out of a perfect alignment with gravity, which is to be heel and toe at the same height. We hear flat shoes are not bad. Well, does that make sense that when we're born, our feet and our heels and our toes are the same height? So why would a flat shoe be bad? It's because,
Yeah.
again, you become so accustomed to something that compresses your foot and deforms your foot in different ways that we start to become reliant on these conventional footwear. Now, the final element is the idea of thin. And I'll give a summary afterwards, but thin means when I go outside, I don't put a blindfold on my eyes, I put sunglasses on. So I could still let information in, but I'm not blocking information. Well, when we wear a Hoka shoe that's 14 inches thick, we're basically standing on pillows that dissociate our body from the ground. And so our body's like, wait, like I feel unstable because I'm standing on something and I can't feel the ground. So it really doesn't make sense in our society. Is the older we get, the more cushion we put on our shoes. And so we're more dissociated from the ground. And so a lot of people
hmm
that experience numbness or just like poor balance, it's like, well, your feet, it's the use it or lose it principle. Our feet are meant to feel. There are hundreds of thousands of nerve endings at the bottom of the foot. So you'll see like a shoe like this is very thin. So it allows me to feel the pebbles on the ground.
Yeah.
And and I have different tools like spiky balls and acupressure mats that I use to help people to start like awakening up those nerve endings. So why I invite people to go barefoot is this concept of let's go back to our roots, or let's wear shoes that are at least mimic barefoot like environments so that my foot functions optimally. And again, the whole ground up philosophy, the name of the company, from the ground up, is that our feet obviously have an impact on the rest of the body because that's what we stand on. So it's the foundation of our body, just like a building wouldn't be built on like a shady foundation.
Do you think that a lot of the shoes were really created for manufacturing ease, or was it they didn't really think about actually making it work for an individual human, but it was more like, does this make it easier to build to create it in the factory
There's two
without thinking
things. Yeah.
about how it actually affects your health?
Yeah, I think that's definitely the case. And well, there's a couple things to this. Aesthetics, fashion, like there's no doubt about it. A pointier shoe looks slimmer, and like you think back to there's in China there's this ancient practice of Chinese binding where they bind the women would bind up their foot at a young age to
Oh,
make the foot more slender. And so the
oh,
foot bones literally get like compressed together, and like on X-ray they look completely different. In other cultures, we used to wear corsets back in Elizabethan times to
mhm.
compress the rib cage to make you look thinner. Well, what's that going to do? It's going to inhibit your ability to fully expand your rib cage. So when it comes to the biggest thing is this, like, how does that sexy shoe look on your foot?
It's the
Like
aesthetics. So
it's
the
the
human
aesthetics.
aesthetics, like fashion, nor social norms that like women's
Exactly.
feet should look like this, or men's
Yes.
feet should look like
The
that.
dress shoes, you see the Italian shoes, super pointy. And so it's really sad to see at a very young age. I have like my cousins have kids now, and I'm seeing like already at 2 years old, the shoes like or don't move already. And they're already, so it's like, we're doing this at such a young age. But I
Yeah.
mean, and the thing is, if you ask 100 people on the street, like, what does a good shoe mean to you? Everyone will say the exact opposite definition of me.
Hmm.
However, I'll tell you firsthand, being like the expert who helps people with foot pain every single day of my life now, and who went through tons and tons of chronic pain, the answer is not more, it's less. It's learning to let
Yeah.
your foot do its thing, just like every other part of the body needs to do its own thing. But when it comes to rehab and therapy, for whatever reason, we develop a blind spot and we don't think that the feet respond to stimulus like, my biceps would respond to stimulus if I put them through the ringer in the gym. But obviously it's deliberate in what we need to do. Like, I actually need to teach people how to flatten out their feet well. One of the biggest things that gets rid of plantar fasciitis is learning to flatten out the foot properly. Now, that
Hmm.
doesn't just mean the whole foot collapsing in. It's this like almost this 3D spreading where the whole foot is in contact, but the arch descends to the ground. And now all those muscles get loaded like a spring to now rebound the foot back to um, its normal shape. So the foot is meant to change shapes through the gait cycle. But when we're in the supportive footwear that is very compressive, basically the foot stays the same throughout. And so it just doesn't get the natural stimulus it needs to be healthy.
That's interesting because you can see if you look at animals and you look at their feet, like my cat's feet when she's like running, and you look at dog, and it's like sometimes we lose sight of how other animals that don't have footwear, that
Yeah,
don't have gloves on, they like we lose sight of like the natural state of things. We
100%.
go to all this artificial stuff or the things to, like you say, to insulate you. A lot of
Mm-hmm.
times, like in order to, like it's a kind of a different example, but if you're driving a sports car, it's not like a Lexus Cadillac. The driver has to be able to feel everything, so it's not very soft. It's very kind of raw, so he can feel the road, he can feel everything, he can hear everything,
Yeah.
so you can use all your senses to kind of know what you're doing. Where if you're in some luxury vehicle, it's like you can't hear anything. Well, how are
Yes.
you supposed to really drive if you can't hear anything?
Yeah.
If you
So
can't feel it?
our feet need to be attuned, and that's the thing. Is like, I had a client that had 3 years of foot numbness, and she went to doctors and neurologists, and the neurologist into podiatrists, and the podiatrist into a neurologist, and everyone's doing testing, testing, testing. I said, I don't know if this is going to work, but what we're going to do, we're going to get basically over here. I have like an acupressure mat, so it's a spiky mat. So people look up acupressure mat, they'll see like these sensory mats that have lots of spikes, and I got her to stand on it. She freaked out naturally because it was super unnatural for her foot to be stimulated. I got her in these little toe spreaders. So they basically help to spread the toes back into their ideal alignment. And I got her to start using her feet more. 2 weeks later, after 3 years of dealing with the problem and assessment and diagnosis, because the medical world is obsessed with diagnosis. Unless we give a label to something, we don't understand it. Or
Mhm.
we could just think of it, use it or lose it. Get the feet back to doing what their nature intended them to do. And 2 weeks later, she had no more numbness in her feet. So yeah, it's this like fine tuning that we need to connect our brain back to our feet, which is the only connection to the ground. And so, we talked about why does this exist? Well, yeah, manufacturing is one thing, aesthetics are another. And it's also like we're in this notion now of like more technology is better, right?
Mhm.
You'll hear the words gel shock technology, motion control, stability, springy this, whatever you name, like your bells and whistles type of a marketing buzzword. But at the end of the day, our feet are extremely complicated so that the shoe doesn't have to be. There are
Mhm.
26 bones in each foot, 33 joints, hundreds of tendons, ligaments. It's like a very complicated thing. It's amazing what nature evolved to make us have these crazy feet. And now all of a sudden we're like, our if we're not in arch support, our feet are stupid. And it's like this very like
It's sexy marketing.
it's
Yeah,
smart evolution.
yeah. Well, it's like that NASA marketing for something that it doesn't need a NASA solution. Like,
Yeah.
so it's like a lot of times people don't understand like the basics. Is like if you're thinking about like you're more into nature and the world, then you want to experience the world with connectedness. But if you like you said, the feet are what's touching the planet. It's touching the ground. If you're not, and a lot of people probably aren't realizing like how much is connected to your feet, like your health. Like there's a lot of things that people don't think like, oh, the simple solution. that can't be that simple. It's like, but if you need to connect your feet to the ground,
Yeah.
like your bare feet to the ground. If you think about indigenous people, that's what they were doing. It's like
Of
bare feet
course.
to the ground, or moccasin was like very limited,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. So
So,
that's the idea of moccasins. Everything was about just a little bit of protection. Like, you know what? You're walking in certain environments, like sometimes their feet need a break. And so protection is not a bad thing, but it's not with like the supersized type of shoe that like literally like shields you completely to the point where you have no feeling. A little bit of
mm,
goes a long way. So yes, I agree. And then the other thing is like we talked about, you're mentioning this idea of grounding our bare feet against, Mother Earth. And a lot of people like, in our Western world, like they think that's very woo woo and like, it's like it's so complicated and like, but the reality is, what's an EKG? You're measuring the electricity of the heart, right? We are electric beings. As I'm talking, there's a lot of firing going on in my brain that's sending things out as I'm moving my arms and moving my lips. So, ultimately, we're electric beings. And when we never ground ourselves, we could actually be out of electrical balance.
yeah, out of
And
alignment. Yeah, out of
yeah, and it
alignment,
doesn't have to be
like with the
that
universe.
complicated. Yeah, and like, when a plane gets down and touches the ground, they'll often ground a plane because it's like safe for the plane to discharge. And it's the same thing with us. When we put our feet on the ground, we're just kind of discharging. And they're really cool, like before and after, like scans of people's bodies showing like a 30 minutes on like Mother Earth, just spending time on the grass or whatever, changes someone's like inflammation in their body. So it's just
Mhm.
very obvious. Like and if you don't
Yeah,
like
yeah.
want to hear the science behind it, just get your feet on the ground. Like
I
it's
can
as
hear
simple
the
as that.
poetry of like nature is the cathedral, like a
Yeah.
Victorian poet, right
Hmm.
out the point. And I'm a mountain biker, and I feel real vitalized when I hike or mountain bike.
Yeah.
And I live in New Hampshire, and I just go out in the pines. And I
Yeah.
chose to live here because I can just go out in the pines and just
Love it.
I get recharged. And I'm a
Yeah.
writer. I write songs, but if I go out in the woods, I kind of it gets rid of the noise.
Yep.
And
Yep.
if I go into a forest pool or go into a lake after a mountain bike ride and take my shoes off and just actually hang out in the lake for like a half hour just to kind of cool down, it always feels like just we've invigorating
Yeah.
that connection. That's all I need. I didn't need anything fancy other than just walking in the woods.
Speak my language, my friend.
But it just seems like if your feet have so many sensors and it's like you're actually eliminating some of your feedback loop with the world
Yep.
by wearing these shoes that isolate you from that feedback. And then it's like the cascading of effect of like if you have the wrong kind of shoe, it's getting you out of alignment. It could hurt your feet hurt, you're numb, your back could get hurt, right? Your whole body could get out of alignment. It sounds like that one thing can cascade to a bunch of other things.
For sure. And that's why I mean the cool thing today is that there's like a ton of new brands that exist that are not like, so everyone may or may not have heard of the Vibrams, the five-finger toed shoes. And like a lot of people are like, yeah, I'm not wearing that. I'm like, okay, fine, I get it. But like, I have a pair and like, a lot of people say, well, you're not going to wear them if you're trying to pick up some ladies or whatever. But there are lots of cool brands. There's one called Vivo Barefoot. There's something called Zero Shoes. There's called Feel Grounds. There are like literally 25, 30 brands that exist now. Unfortunately, they're not available at Foot Locker or whatever. So, you have
Yeah,
to
people don't know
find
about
them
it.
by
Giga
listening to
fringe.
podcasts like this or like be on the fringe because unfortunately, this isn't mainstream news, which is a crime to me because again, it's like we're being pushed the wrong solution for obviously, like for money reasons, who knows? Like obviously, like, Nike has a bigger budget than me, so they're gonna, be able to, get louder and more coverage. But there are cool shoes that like, that could be worn in casual environments, athletic environments that allow your feet to become stronger. Like I had a client today who's like, oh my God, like I just got them recently. She finally listened to my advice and got it. She's like, my feet muscles feel like they've been working. And that's the thing in your environment where your foot is completely compressed, her feet do not feel like they can move ideally. And she's right about that. And all of a sudden we switched the shoe. And along with the exercise I've been showing her, which allow her to kind of connect into this midfoot area, which most people have a hard time like allowing that to descend to the ground. She's like,
Yeah.
okay, now I know what you mean, and so yeah, it's that the upstream consequences are very important. So people that have issues in their back or their knees, ultimately it's how does one load over their foot? Can they like stack their body over one foot and the other? That's what gait is. That's what walking is. It's like going one foot to the other in this like loaded stacked manner.
It also is just very interesting, like that you pointed out that people's feet, like their feet, like their individual toes, have been kind of compressed
Yeah.
and not allowed to spread out. Being a piano player, we
Mm-hmm.
kind of practice spreading out our fingers to do the chords.
Yeah.
And I can imagine, like, well, yeah, your feet were designed to spread out, but the mindset from the culture and from all the aesthetic
Yeah.
is, oh, we need to tighten it up. And
Yes.
it's like the opposite of what you actually need to do. And that's like the cultural, aspects. I was a sociology major, to get these cultural macrocosm mores that force people into behaviors that actually aren't good, but
Yeah.
they get stuck into it because they're kind of bullied as an overall culture. And they're like, that's what the norm is. And if you're outside the norm, then you're not cool, you know?
Yeah, well, I like the words, so we talked about conventional, and I guess you pulled that from our page together, but the idea is like normal versus natural. It's, unfortunately, we've normalized dysfunction in our society. So it's normal to be unhealthy. It's normal to be overweight. It's normal to feel stressed all the time. Normal, normal, normal. Is it natural state of the thriving being to be unhealthy, to be overweight, to be, sleep deprived, to be excellent, blah, 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 like, so that's the thing is I agree with you 100%. It's like, we need to make sexy this idea of natural healthy. And so, yes, modern medicine is incredible at doing certain things. It can increase our lifespan. And people, my grandmother just passed away, but she was 97 years old and she was on some medications for a very long time. And, we had her for a very long life. But if she wasn't on all those medications, obviously, like, she may not have had as long a lifespan.
Yeah.
But what modern medicine
Yeah.
fails to address is not lifespan, but health span. The
Yeah.
quality of one's life.
Quality of
Like,
life. Yeah.
you have obviously an epidemic right now of obesity and, diabetes and all these things, and they're all related to our the way that we live our life. And you're offered a very quick, here's the pill, here's this, here's that, next,
Yeah.
next. And so it's like this, like, and it's not the fault of doctors. It's just the whole system is not built to advocate for health. Advocate, healthcare is not healthcare. It's sick care. It's management of disease. It's not optimization of
Yeah.
one's
It's more like
well-being.
after
Yeah.
the fact.
Yes,
Yeah. It's like,
exactly. It's
it's not actually
reactive.
being preemptive.
Yes.
Reactive, it's not preemptive. And then it's also like, even though we have all this technology, we have a lot of bad outcomes in the West.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
It's like if you have all these bad outcomes with all this tech, then why are we having so many bad outcomes with people and their quality of life is not what it could be? Like you said, it's like the measure isn't just the length, it's like what is the quality of that life, of what
Yeah.
you can do, and are you actually happy? Do you actually feel good? Do you feel dynamic, or do you feel kind of worn out or run down? Because the way the society, what it pitches isn't actually the optimum thing for you, because you don't listen to your body. You don't listen to your like spirit and your heart. You're there's this disconnectedness, and it kind of like, it's very interesting. You start with your feet, but like the disconnectedness, it goes from your feet to your head, from the
It's a
ground up.
funny
It's like there's
thing.
all this.
It's really funny. So, when people hear the word hippie, right? Like you could classify hippie as someone maybe barefoot and nature. And like when we say the word hippie, there's this negative connotation as if that's a bad thing.
Yeah,
And I like,
bad thing.
I see the word hippie as the word connected.
Yeah,
You do things alternatively. And the word alternative, it's like, oh, like, like I help people with pain, get out of pain. And I'm alternative because my, I'm in basically it's a big gym that I own, and it's just like movement space. People don't come into my clinic and I put a heating pad and electrodes and massage their boo-boo away, because the problem with that type of approach is that the moment they stand up from the table, they go back to the same movement patterns that caused the overloading in the first place. And then the pain comes back, and then the pain comes back. And you're on this never ending treadmill of like short-term pain relief that doesn't address why the pain is there. So when you talk about this idea of like start with the feet, it also makes me realize, like, I think honestly, I started to grow very emotionally and spiritually with this injury. Like, I obviously at the time, like, I was in a pretty bad depressive state when I was dealing with these pains, when I was suffering and I couldn't, do what I wanted to do. But now I've reframed that whole experience as, wow, this is the catalyst that changed everything in my life. And so, I've got a quote over here, but injury is not just a process of recovery, it's a process of discovery. And so
Mm-hmm.
if we reframe the pains we have as not as a nuisance, but like feel the pain, like don't hide away from it, but then
Yeah.
how can this be my my new adventure, that I start to focus inward on myself, on my body, on my mind, on my soul, as you mentioned, and realize how interconnected the body is, not these like vehicle parts that just need to be like replaced when I have my hip starts hurting.
Replacing. Yeah.
Put a new
Yeah.
hip,
You'll be like the Bionic Man. You just can replace the parts. I mean, that's what people like. It's the logical conclusion is like, why would I just replace myself with like robotic parts and be like $6 million man? And like rather than actually going back to more of an indigenous or an Eastern methodology of having connectedness. Be barefoot. Actually, get those sensors in your feet to actually feel, spread out the toes, feel the earth. And it's kind of like as a creative person, I don't like to be in a box. I like to think about the muse, and I feel things can just come to me because I'm a receptor, or I can channel things. And I don't like to go for just something perfection. I like to go for in the moment, no bad notes, let it be, trust yourself, trust what you're feeling, and go with those things and be expressive about it. So if you're expressive, then you're vulnerable, or you listen, or you have empathy, or even empathy for yourself. Where a lot of people are taught to like, well, I don't need empathy for myself, so I ignore the pain, or ignore this, ignore that, build up, then explode. Instead of having something that's sustainable, a sustainable thing that I can actually do, not just a 12-step program, not just an 18-step, but what is it that you could do for the rest of your life that you could actually be proactive on and actually have good results, rather than some kind of flash in the pan thing that comes next day and next day.
And the thing is, pain is usually a very powerful motivator to get people started when they're finally ready to listen. It's like, the classic example. It's like, okay, I have pain in my shoulder. So, and when I reach over, that hurts. And no, that hurts. So it's like you start to like limit yourself in a box, because like now anything you do starts hurting, and you avoid and you avoid and avoid. And eventually it's like, okay, like what motivated you to pick up the phone? It's like, well, I can't deal with the pain. Well, yeah, you could deal with the pain for a freaking long time, so what made you wait so long? It's like, okay, well, that now I can't pick up my kid or whatever, or whatever it might be. So, people don't come to me because they're in pain. They come to me because like it's now impacting their ability to connect with others, or impacting
to do something,
to do something really relevant to them. And it's very important that when I go through this process with them, I help them connect to their why. Because if I'm not connecting to their why, they're like, okay, you just want to fix me. What's your main goal? Get out of pain. Well, let's chug some alcohol and we'll get out of pain pretty fast. No, obviously it's like, I understand, like connecting them to their deeper sense of what's stopping them. And I think that when people are in pain, they're in a state of vulnerability, as you said that word, that they're ready to start opening up in certain ways and like be more open. And it sometimes takes hitting a lower low to start to finally wake up. Obviously, this is not the best way, because it just should be this more like open philosophy in life that's just like way more about just listening to the early signals instead of listening when the fire alarm is screaming at you to make a change.
And also, like, where does like the victim mentality play in recovery? Like, if you're in that kind of mindset, is that's a detriment to like making progress, in your
For sure.
opinion?
When people, one of the biggest words that you'll hear in the therapeutic space is fix. Like, I want you to fix me. They say like and so the fixing, when they say that word, ownership equals on therapists, not on me.
Hmm.
And I kind of flip that on its head, be like, look, I get people very powerful results, but it comes from me being your guide rather than your fixer. Like, I'm going to demonstrate some things to you and humble you and show you like, oh my God, why does this little movement seem so hard when like you could squat 200 pounds, but I get you doing this simple movement and all of a sudden your legs start vibrating. That's where it's all about empowering people to, instead of playing this victim, like I have no ownership, I can't do anything about it. Well, if I could be your guide and meet you where you're at and not overwhelm you, of course, and like, guide you along a small, like a slow, 1% better every day, or, big wins, or small wins add up, then, that goes a long way into them, like starting to believe in themselves again.
Also, that the fact that they eventually, like any solution that's actually going to work a lifetime, is that the person's going to have to actually take the reins and do a lot of the work themselves. Not that the
Or,
teacher or the mentor didn't do any work, but a lot of it is going to be on the person.
of
And
course.
a lot of times, if you push it off on the doctor, or you push it off on the life coach or the mentor or whoever it is, then it's never you.
Yeah.
And then if it's never you, you never solve the problem that's been there in the looking glass the whole time, that
Yeah.
you didn't address, like the fact that you have imposter syndrome. If you don't address that, that's going to cascade everywhere, right? If you don't address that you have this idea that you're not good enough, that you're going to be self-defeating, that you just limitations. You can have those limitations where you're just self-limiting, and you're never going to do it because you don't think you can.
Yeah.
Until you can get past that, it's like you don't go past go.
Yeah, it's a huge thing that, like, again, like, and it's really about people believing, because they've been told stories, or they've been telling themselves the same story for their whole life, that like, I can't, I can't, I can't, instead of I presently struggle with.
It's so interesting that like every day I learn something, and just understanding how people have been constraining their feet, like they constrain their feelings. It's
Mm-hmm.
like a common thing. It's like people are always, like you said, the corset. I get people, restraining themselves, or like
Yeah.
it just
All
not
for
doing
outwards,
something,
right? It's all about the
just
outward
outward appearance.
appearance of self. We cover our
Yeah.
feelings so that we're not showing weakness. We're covering our feet so that because our feet are inherently weak, instead of just like realizing like we're born with everything we need. We should honor our feelings, feel feelings, express ourselves, instead of saying anger is bad or sadness is bad. We're actually like permitting these emotions to come up and express them in healthy ways, rather than bottling everything down. Eventually things explode from an emotional standpoint, or explode from a physical standpoint.
But it's interesting, like there's a point where you're talking about how the rib cage plays with your lower body and upper body.
Mm-hmm.
And is that all related to your, the starting point of your feet,
Yeah.
not
So,
doing the right things with your feet?
well, one of the biggest things, another very big myth, and we'll dive into this. This is kind of very related, is what posture means to most people, right? So when
Mhm.
I say the word posture, what do you think of?
Thinking they like if you're slouching or you're not standing upright, or your mom said, "Hey, why you slouching? Why you got your head
Exactly,
down?"
right? So what I'm going to invite you to do is take your hands in a fist and squeeze them together really, really hard. Okay. So
Uh,
imagine you're squeezing your hands together as hard as you can. Okay.
yeah.
Now, after a few seconds, you'll start to feel a little tension build up, right? Now I'm going to say, I want you to do this for 12 hours. You're like, ugh,
Oh,
I don't want to do that.
like, no, I'm not
Yeah,
gonna do
for like 10 seconds.
that.
So let's now think about sit up straight. Sit up straight, stand up straight, chest up, shoulders down and back. Okay. Now feel your lower back muscles for a second. Aren't they tensing up a little bit? So
Yeah, it's
why is it
tense.
the same kind of idea that if we understand that if your hands don't want to be squeezed for 10 seconds, why does your lower back want to be in good posture with a, really puffed up chest and extended, upper back and whatever, and all this idea? Now let's contrast that with, 10 years ago, I visited India and I saw 80-year-olds that were able to do an ass to grass squat, fully down with their heels flat on the floor in a very down position. It's something that we go to the
Wow.
washroom. It's the ability to just like be sitting comfortably. It's the resting position of the human being, right?
Hmm.
Now, in that posture, is someone's spine good posture or is it slouchy and
No,
relaxed?
not the idea we have.
It's not the idea we have. It's a slouched and relaxed posture where the spine can flex. So one of the biggest things that I actually coach my clients through, who every day I'm dealing with people with back pain, is the idea of slouching, getting their ribs to come down, and, giving themselves permission to relax their back. And all of a
Mhm.
sudden, the tension that they had starts to go away. So the relationship of our rib cage is, look, if I puff my chest forward, it's actually going to put more weight in certain areas of my feet, versus if I stay more relaxed, it determines where my center of mass lies on my feet. So a huge element of what I teach people how to do is, imagine you have 1 foot forward and you're about to start a race, okay? Would I start a race leaning backward or leaning forward over my front leg?
Yeah, you'd think you'd go forward, not
Exactly,
backwards,
right?
because
Exactly.
you're
So
gonna be
the
kind of
key,
self-defeating.
exactly, because me leaning backwards is actually loading my back. But unfortunately or surprisingly, what you'll see is when I get people into these positions, their natural tendency is to want to lean into their lower back and not know how to load their weight on top of the middle of their foot. And so what I get people
Mm,
to do is I actually learn, okay, we're going to bend down in a very slouchy posture, stacked on top of the foot. And when you stand up, you're not allowed to pop your chest up, but I want you to push the floor with your foot. And what's going to happen is their legs, they start vibrating because they don't actually know how to work. Because every time they lift up from the ground, they lift with their nipple line popping to the sky, and so their lower back is doing all the work. So this is a huge thing. Is kind of
oh, so that's why
teaching
they
their
get
back to go 0% of the work and getting all the load into their legs. And inherently, we hear that bend your knees to pick something up. But when it's actually like takes place in real life, people, the moment they actually start to stand up, their knee straightens out and then they lift up through their back. And they don't know how to keep their bent
come to
throughout the
back.
whole movement. And so this rib cage, right, is in the middle of our body. So naturally, it's going to have a big role. And when we think about like you mentioned cat, dog, right? We want a sexy spine that moves, that rotates, that side bends. But oftentimes in gym environments, people are told, brace your spine, don't move. And so we develop this very like
Mhm.
stability at the cost of mobility of a very like, look at, I have a quote from Conor McGregor in the background. No
Mm,
fighter is fighting with good posture, with chest up, good posture in
yeah,
quotation marks. They're
yeah,
fighting with this
and they're kind
more,
of
fluid, sexy
yeah.
looking
Remember
spine,
Muhammad
right?
Ali? Yeah, I mean, if I ever watched a Muhammad Ali fight, he wasn't in a good posture. He was kind of like
But
hunched, kind of
remember that we're now going
leaning
to
towards your
redefine
foot.
good posture as quote unquote
Yeah,
good posture, because it's not good
yeah,
posture. Good posture is
yeah.
relaxed, not tense. We don't want to be squeezing our jaw, squeezing our hands. We don't want to be squeezing our back. So the rib cage plays a massive role in our body. And so, like a lot of things I'm doing with clients is learning how to exhale and breathe,
Mm,
teach their ribs to start to come down, because when people are in constant state of fight or flight, imagine I'm going to scare you. Your body's not going to be relaxed. It's
yeah,
going to be in that type of posture.
yeah.
And so we need to
Lurch.
learn
Yeah.
to get the exhale, to relax, down regulate. And that goes along with a lot of the things we've been talking about today, about just like this holistic approach that when someone has back pain, unless you like, it's not just going straight to the symptoms, the site of pain, but rather zooming out. How do you sleep? What's your stress management like? When I put my hands in the rib cage, does it actually move? Most people have very stiff ribs that don't come down as they breathe out. And so they start to use their necks to breathe. And there's a whole story behind the body that I like analyze when I'm with clients. Um, just makes you realize like, how much you actually have to look more at the whole picture rather than just diving in straight to,
Yeah, it's a holistic.
hammering away. Go ahead. Yeah.
Well, it's a holistic picture, like everything. Like a lot of things are very expansive rather than narrow. Everybody wants to go into narrow lanes and
Yep.
just work on one leg of a stool and
Yeah.
think that that's it. And it's like, well, how is that ever going to work? Right? the idea is like a
temporary.
lot of times you have to look at like everything, like the heart, the mind, the body, the soul, the whole picture. But then if you only work on the mind, you don't work on the body, you don't work on your heart. It's like there's something missing. So it's like you're kind of put it together. And I practice a Buddhism that's from Japan, like a Nichiren Daishonin Buddhism, where we do a lot of chanting and breathing exercises as part of our practice.
Yeah.
And it's like it's an everyday thing. But
Hmm.
that kind of it creates that kind of quiet in your mind, gets rid of the noise and gets you into these breathing practices and this kind of state where you feel better, and it's not medicine. It's just that you're using
It is medicine.
your mind and your body and your voice
That
to
is
create
medicine.
like a safe zone. Yeah, it's a medicine, but it's like
It's
it's
just a
not the
different.
medicine that the
It's not the
Western world
definition
thinks
of that
about.
one would think of, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, it's just like the more you learn when you talk to more people. Like if you keep your circle kind of tight, and then you only know what you know. You only
Yeah.
know what you have experienced because you're not willing to go outside of it. The cool thing about podcasts, we can talk to folks like yourself. They can bring ideas, and like you're showing us, like, oh, there's footwear that people should be aware of, but they don't get it because it's not out there in the big picture world.
Yeah.
Do you have to seek it out because my feet, I'm hurting, my body's hurting, my back's hurting. Well, what can I can do? Maybe I can find a therapist. Maybe I'll go check out the web and find somebody who's got an alternative idea. And that's, people start looking. They start knowing that something's not working. Like you knew it wasn't working. It's like, why am I going to do this? That doesn't work.
Yeah.
You look for solutions, right?
Long-term solutions, right? Because again, it's orientation of timelines, recognizing that like we're all chasing for quick fixes, but rather than taking ownership in our process, our journey.
Yeah, the quick fix is always so hard. It's like, like people just want something done in 30 seconds, 90 seconds. They want something to answer in social media, like elevator pitch. You got 30 seconds to hit that person and make them want to do it. So you do what's bombastic. You get the sales, it's like a snake oil. They like with the bombastic claims that things that are not reasonable, but it's like, oh, that's appealing because
Yeah.
but if you have to do hard work, that's not always appealing. So people aren't going to be into like, well, I've got to do a lot of this 90% myself. Well, that's not appealing. But thank you for being on the show. We have come to a point where I do have another podcast, but I think I want the audience again to check out your website, rebuild ground up physio.com, and
Yeah, I think,
you
well,
can
it's a
click on that
complicated
and
link. But I would just invite people to go check out like my content on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube. It's all at Ground Up Physio. So Ground Up and then Physio's PHYSIO. And this program, again, as
okay,
I
cool.
alluded at the beginning, is like, so I'm located in Montreal and I do take on virtual clients, but so if people want more one-on-one guided approach, but I also have this, it's an online mobility and strength program that teaches the exact same system that I'm using with my one-on-one clients. For those that feel like they've been around the houses and have tried everything, they feel like they're older in their body than they should be compared to their actual age, and they want to feel that like sense of athleticism and springiness. That's what I go through in the program. It's not just dinky banded exercises, but it's actually showing the stack that I mentioned about teaching you how to use your whole body again. And it's for people that are, beginner or advanced. Like if you're just looking to get off the couch and feel better, or you want to get back to playing a sport, it doesn't really matter. Good movement is good movement. And that's why I teach in the program. So if people want to check that out, I highly recommend, go to the link or just links in the bios of all my social media so people could find me there.
Well, thank you again. And like I said, people will be able to click through that everywhere we're published. We're on all the podcast platforms that people are familiar with. And we will have a landing page for that tomorrow. And we'll get that to you so people can just pick the podcast that they like to listen to or watch. And so thank you again for being on the show. I appreciate it.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.